And we are the Coalition, loud and proud, outrage porn-free, civilly disobedient media, broadcasting live on the Worldwide Coalition Radio Network at coalitionradionetwork.com, facebook.com/the Coalition Radio, on the mighty Twitter at Coalition_radio, and of course the mothership at coalitionradio.us, where links to our YouTube page, our Spotify page, our Twitter account can all be found. By the way, we simulcast on Facebook at coalitionradionetwork.com, on Periscope at Twitter. Our Twitter account is coalition_radio, and of course on the YouTube. So we've been hosting candidates for about the last week or so. We're working through literally the entire libertarian field, a little bit different format than you're used to meeting with them, as opposed to an Ask Me Anything where there's some timing and back and forth questions digitally, as opposed to a televised or digitally televised, televised, sorry, a little feedback there, digitally televised debate. This is more of a conversation. The rules of the coalition are very simple, rules of engagement, if you will. We live and die for independent candidates, libertarians in particular, but Greens, progressives, anyone. We don't handicap elections here. The lazy mainstream media obsesses with fundraising, obsesses with polling, obsesses with all the minutia that comes with handicapping a race. They'll literally have conversations with the candidate about how they're going to position themselves on an issue solely for the purpose, and again, the conversation's quite open about it, solely for the purpose of obtaining maximum voter percentage without any real conversation about how the candidate feels on the issue. So the rules are simple. Number one, we don't discuss fundraising. We'll give the guest, if you will, ample opportunity to engage in what we call shameless self-promotion on fundraising. No problem. We don't discuss polls. Not interested. We don't care if you're going to win. We want to know why you should. And it's really that simple. And that is the essence, if you will, of what the American political system should stand for. An opportunity to put 2, 3, 4, maybe more candidates in a race, each of them able to develop and represent their philosophical, their practical stances on the issues of the day, and voters make an informed choice, as opposed to the mess and the dumpster fire that is the American process today. Joining us tonight is someone who has been with us on the show before, so he is now officially a repeat offender. He joined us. We did a marathon session, it seems like a lifetime ago, when Donald Trump decided to engage in his one of his many jihads against immigrants to America. He joined us in a marathon session with a handful of candidates, folks from the American Civil Liberties Union and the libertarian community at large. Of course, he is the man in the yellow hat. Taxation is theft. And of course, I'm talking about Dan Berman. Dan, welcome back to the Coalition.
Thanks for having me on.
All right, so let's get right down to it. One of the questions we ask everybody, I'm not sure if you had an opportunity to watch any of our conversations. We had the Pony Man on last night, just as an example. But I try to get into a little bit of the backstory, and not really from an emotional sense, but so folks understand referentially how you've become a libertarian in that sense. So tell us a little bit about yourself, what you do for a living when you're not campaigning. And again, as always, what was that light bulb moment, that moment when you decided you had found a home, that you were, in fact, a libertarian?
Yeah, so I grew up in California, so I was surrounded by blue. Everything was very Democrat. I was afraid of guns for most of the early part of my life. It's when I started I wanted to start a business, and I saw like all the, you got to file taxes, you need a permit. And I just started thinking, what sense does this make? It was almost kind of like that was built into me. Like, wait, what are these guys doing for me that I need to ask them for permission to sell something to other people, for me to have to do all the work and then to give them half of the money? It never really made sense to me. And then, of course, as a teenager, I started getting traffic tickets, and I always wanted to. I was always an argumentative person, so I always tried to fight them, and any way I could. And as I started, I mean, that becomes aside from the fact that it's fun, and especially when you start winning, it's like, yeah, I'm awesome. I can beat these tickets, and everyone starts coming to me for advice. When I started like trying to figure out more advanced ways to fight these tickets, I went down a rabbit hole and I found out that this entire system is just smoke and mirrors, and that there's the law, and then there's the law as it's enforced. Um, and basically the government's got the wool over our eyes. They're telling us that we have to follow certain rules when we don't. They have to follow rules which are in the Constitution, which it seems like they don't, but a lot of times they have a loophole for it. So seeing all this, I wanted to wake up my friends and say we shouldn't be participating in this criminal game of the wizard behind the curtain, stealing from us and putting us in cages for possession of a plant, or for just engaging in behavior that they didn't like, that wasn't hurting anybody. And so I tried telling my friends, hey, let's fight this, and there was resistance. Like, we don't want to get involved in that. We don't want the police to arrest. We don't, we've got our whole futures ahead of us. We're going to college and we're going to get great jobs. And so I just, that wasn't acceptable to me. I had to keep fighting. And I got into it with the IRS after a while. That was an interesting learning experience, and that sent me down a whole other rabbit hole. And it's I've always just been trying to figure out, how do we make this stop, because it's not right. We shouldn't have to be expert lawyers just to prevent ourselves from getting robbed. And so I really wanted to, it's not enough to just teach people, because, even if they know they're getting robbed, they don't know how to stop it because they don't have that expertise. It's not easy. It's not as easy as just saying, hey, I don't want you to rob me, and then it goes away. They don't make it that easy for you. So I took it upon myself to take this fight and say, I'm going to make this stop, whatever it takes.
It's taken a lot, hasn't it? I mean, as someone like yourself, you've been in the campaign the entire duration. We actually first met at a couple of years ago. How long have you been active in the party per se, the Big L Libertarian Party?
I would say I first got involved around 2014.
Mm-hmm.
That's when I ran my first election. I guess, well, maybe it was 2013, because I had a little bit of time before that. But yeah, it was I ran for the Texas State House, and I found it on accident. I mean, I was out there searching. I was already fighting with the IRS. I'd seen some great documentaries, which led me to like the We the People Foundation, the Tea Party, which was, before it was taken over by the Republicans. And I was looking for these groups. I was like, where are these people? And I was living in San Antonio at the time. And I'm like, I couldn't find anything local. I didn't know where to look. I wasn't meeting the right people. I was like, man, where do I find these people? And oddly enough, I was, because I'm always into like, hey, let me, grow myself, let me learn a new skill. And so one of the skills was public speaking. So I went on to meetups.com, and I found a local Toastmaster group, which happened to be called Liberty Toastmasters, which actually happened to be run by the Bexar County Libertarians. And that was how I got inducted into the party.
Talk to us about the campaign process. Now, in your first go around, you ran for state office. Now you're running, well, for the ultimate position. What's it been like? What have you learned? And give us some of your best experiences.
Sure. I think probably one of the most revealing things that I've learned is, I went into this thinking, we need somebody at the helm of the United States government to make sure that it operates within the Constitution. And I learned that, that's not what people are voting for. Yeah, that's supposed to be the job of the president, right? To execute the laws, to run the government within the confines of the Constitution, which, in my opinion, was always to make sure that the government wasn't stealing from people and violating their rights. But it's deeper than that, because people don't really want somebody to run the government. They want somebody to solve their problems. And we've seen this. I learned this from talking to so many people, because I wasn't here to just rally the libertarians and say, we're going to make this work. I was reaching out to Trump supporters and Bernie Sanders supporters and Andrew Yang supporters. And I was really trying to understand what it is that they want and how I can deliver what they want with a um, libertarian philosophy or a libertarian problem solving mindset. And in doing so, what I realized is these people weren't supporting Bernie Sanders because they thought he was going to execute the laws of the Constitution. They were supporting him because they thought he was going to solve their problems. And their problems were they have a sick grandmother who needs health care, or they're getting ready to go to college and they know they can't afford it, and the job market looks terrible, and they don't want to have themselves set up to just work like a slave for the rest of their life and never be able to own a home or get married or have kids. That was their problem. And of course, the libertarian philosophy can actually solve that for them by saying, we're going to get rid of the taxes. We're going to allow you to own property without taxing it over and over again. And through this, we've created what we're calling the new American dream, which is the idea that every American should own property. We shouldn't be tied to the system of the economy where our entire life depends on our next paycheck coming. 80% of the country is in debt. And like, who are we all in debt to? To banks who somehow illegitimately took over ownership of the entire, like all of the property in the entire country. It makes no sense. Everybody's renting instead of owning property. And this happened, it all started out with taxes and government programs. I mean, the FHA alone has been so destructive, but everyone thinks, no, the FHA is a great program. It means I only have to pay 3% down on a house, and they'll extend the payments out for 30 years. It's amazing. But here's the thing. When you look at the effect that that's had on the actual cost of housing, what it does is it makes the purchase price 4 or 5 times more. It makes your actual payment price 8 times more because you're paying a lot more in interest over 30 years. And it puts you in debt for 30 years. That alone should be mind blowing. And then with the property taxes, that just drags everything out. And then when you're working hard to pay it off, the income taxes make it that much more difficult. And so we're in this system, and people aren't looking for somebody who's going to get in there and say, oh, well, I'm going to follow the Constitution. That's not what people want. They're hurting. They're in pain. They're in fear that they're going to be homeless and starving tomorrow. They need somebody who can solve that problem for them. And so what I've really learned about this campaign, running this campaign, is that it's not just about what we libertarians want. It's about showing the rest of the world how libertarianism is actually going to make their lives better. And then we grow as libertarians, and then we get more people to become libertarians. And eventually we'll have so many people who think like libertarians, it won't matter who gets elected. We're going to be demanding that the government not step on our rights. And that's when we're actually going to get that dream is going to come true.
You brought up a great point, the notion that folks are looking for government to solve their problems. What do you think in recent American history was that precipitating event, that moment where all of a sudden, rather than looking to solve our own problems, to earn our way or work our way out of debt, that somehow government would be, if you will, the big fathers, or as the Obaministas used to call it, our federal family would look to solve all of your life's problems. What happened to American excellence and American ingenuity and entrepreneurship and innovation? When did we become wards of the state, if you will?
I think it's been very gradual. It's interesting you say wards of the state. I like to compare it to serfdom, because we're basically living on their land, and as long as we work in their factories and we take that money and we pay the kings with it, they'll let us stay on the land. It's like it's become that, but it's been gradual. And of course, there's always times where there's like a major event that allows them to take more power. The Great Depression, right now, 9/11, the market crash in the 80s, World War II. All of these major events have made them come out and say, hey, these are major problems. You need to give us more power, and we're going to solve them. And what people don't understand is we came out of the 2008 housing crisis. And because government came in and they started doing all these things, which most people don't even understand and could never explain, they give credit to the government, because if the government didn't do anything, they think we'd still be in that hole today. And that's absolutely wrong. The government made it worse, and it put us all in more debt and made sure that we're all going to be working harder and paying more in taxes. And that's really what this whole system is about. I mean, we're really feeling it right now when half of the economy, more than half of the economy, is shut down and people are starving. Where's our food coming from? We're starting to get food shortages. Our farms, Americans used to say, the bank used to come around and say, hey, we want to buy your farm and we want to build a bigger farm, or we want to buy your house and build apartment buildings. And people used to say, no, my house is not for sale. My farm is not for sale.
Right.
But now everybody's been forced to sell. And then you get these corporate farms that are consolidating all of this property and becoming these big farms. And then just one corporation says, oh yeah, there's some Chinese company with a lot of money, we'll sell it to them and we'll make a ton of money. And so now we have foreign corporations who own massive amounts of American land because we were forced to sell. When we used to be the people who were like, no, screw you, we're not going to sell anything. And that's all happened through debt. It's happened through property tax. It's happened through inheritance tax. It's happened through all of these taxes that have made us give most of our money to the government instead of keeping it for ourselves and building our own communities and our own homes.
Interestingly enough, as I like to point out, the moral hazards have gone away so that, in a sense, it's okay to be bailed out by the government. And no better example of that, of course, is the big automotive bailout. I'm not talking about years ago when Chrysler under Lee Iacocca went into debt. I'm talking about the 2009 General Motors bankruptcy. And it's interesting because to illustrate your point in terms of them screwing with the natural order of things, General Motors retirees had been encouraged to buy and invest their retirement in these bonds, which essentially acted like they were kind of like savings bonds, except they were generated by General Motors. And they were traded in $25 increments, and they paid a rate of interest. And all in all, you were made to feel like you were an owner. So, of course, as General Motors lurched towards bankruptcy, the market value on these bonds dropped precipitously. You're talking about a $25 par value. All of a sudden, you could buy them for $3 or $4, and they were being paid 5, 6, 7% interest on a $25 value. They were astonishingly good investments. Upon the bankruptcy, what's supposed to happen is that bondholders are supposed to be pretty much right at the front of the line, right after the government, of course, but pretty much right in the front of the line. When the Obaministas renegotiated the General Motors bankruptcy, they put the bondholders in the middle of the line and then took about a year and a half, if you will, to finally issue some type of stock in the new General Motors Corporation in exchange for the failed bonds, but made sure that everybody else, including employees and unions, got paid off first. Now, of course, if you come from a collectivist mindset, that's a good thing, right? They are the actual owners of the industry, the workers. Well, no. Ironically, it was the old workers, the retirees, that they crucified. By the time that folks came around and they actually got some sort of stock in exchange for their bonds, most of these folks had to sell their bonds out at an incredibly low value, basically give them away in order to get money to exist. So government, of course, jumps in, and we're going to save ourselves from ourselves. And in order to save the village, they literally had to burn it. It's a classic case of a government propping up a business that needed to fail, effectively nationalizing it, really, for all intents and purposes. General Motors needed to fail. It should have failed. Would it have been calamitous? Yes, it would have. Would it have resolved itself? Yes, it would have. Do business failures continue to clear and clean and cleanse, if you will, the free market? Yes, they do. And certainly, the coercive nature of taxation shouldn't be used to bail out the failure of a privately held company.
Right. And, a lot of people will say, well, if it weren't for that, GM would be gone.
Okay.
Or Ford might be gone. But what's the consequence? Oh, Americans wouldn't be manufacturing cars. Well, really? I mean, Tesla is still a small company, but imagine if they didn't have to compete with GM and Ford, what would they be doing? What would other car companies be doing if they were able to start up other cars, seeing that, Ford and GM went out of business and Tesla's doing really good. Maybe we should start a new electric company. Maybe they'd hire a lot of the engineers and designers from the other companies and say, well, we got to do something better. We got to look at what these guys are doing. We have to make something amazing. So people who wanted to, because you have a whole culture of people who are like, yeah, buy American cars, like they would never buy a foreign car. How many more Teslas are they going to sell? How many more companies are going to come up to meet that need when these old companies they're building old products that nobody likes anymore? They're for whatever reason they're just not selling, or maybe it's the structure of the company. They're trying to overproduce, and that's just not realistic. I mean, we also have this concept of an infinite economy, right? Infinite production. Ford should always be building cars a million years into the future, but don't we want cars to be more durable and last longer? And so what happens when, their technology gets better, automation gets better, and they're able to produce 100 million cars in a year? That means with the US population being 300 million, that means that every person's going to have to buy a new car every 3 years. And then eventually, what are we going to do with all these other cars? And what are we going to live on a planet that's like stacked, piled high with so many cars that we don't know what to do with them? That makes no sense. Are we going to be wasting our money every 3 years to buy new cars when we've got ones that are like, they're perfectly capable of lasting 20 or 30 years, and we can spend that money on things that are, that make more sense? We look at the stock market, and the stock market's always supposed to go up. The real estate's always supposed to go up. Well, if you had zero growth and real estate stayed at the exact same value, the only way you can make that happen is with inflation. We expect that the stock market is just always going to go up and up and up and up, and that's a fantasy. It's going to have ups and downs. You are going to have businesses that are going to come and go. The typewriter companies, a lot of them are gone. Some of them evolved into something else, and some of them are just gone because nobody uses typewriters anymore.
Right.
That's just the way things are.
It's funny you say that. I worked a long time ago for a company called Smith Corona, and I'll put a shout out to my good friend, my good friends Tom Arnold and Dave Demarest. Nice. You're betraying your age a little bit here, but Smith Corona was a typewriter manufacturer, and somewhere around 1983, 1984, I worked for the parent company of Smith Corona, a company called SCM Corporation. And we went to this, corporate meeting retreat, all the youngins who worked there. And the typewriter people got up and they did their pitch, if you will. And I somewhat idiotically raised my hand and asked a question. I said, what was their reaction going to be to the oncoming assault by line dot matrix printers? Anyone remember dot matrix printers? And they looked at me, number one, with eyes turned to stone, and scoffed, if you will, made sport of the notion that something like a dot matrix printer could replace the typewriter. And
right.
I actually saw a typewriter the other day. I believe it was in a state office building, so that they could fill out the state form that was designed in the 80s.
Still in use,
right, which is scanned by a COBOL running machine, as only states can do. But again, the mantra should be that the low-cost producers who's able to achieve a balance between low price and quality will ultimately be the product that will be accepted for the marketplace. And at the time when it fails one of those two, and that, if you will, that mix that appeals to that individual marketplace, then someone else will replace the provider. There should be no guarantee that the nationality, if you will, or the point of origin, or the owner of, or the owner of the technology is given some lifetime license. What we fail to discuss very often in the populist movement in this nation, personified by the Cheeto, is that ultimately the cost savings generated by some of these tiger economies, some of these lower cost economies in Latin and Central America, has given the American consumer effectively a tax break and an income increase simply because of their ability to manufacture high quality goods at a lower price, thus creating efficiencies in the marketplace which allow us freedom and additional money and personal capital to invest in other things. That's the natural, we call it the economic circle of life, and I'll spare you my Elton John rendition, but that's how it's supposed to work. Economies don't if you will, respect national borders. National borders are irrelevant, and if those nations are involved in somehow price supporting, then ultimately their economies will pay. The Chinese economy, in general, before COVID, was approaching various states of collapse in different sectors because the state had been sponsoring for too long manufacturing companies which simply had no market. So they were going to go away on their own. That's how it works. Somebody new comes along. And instead, I mean, what are your thoughts on tariffs, for example?
Oh yeah, I mean it's so you've got King Trump and you've got king of any other country, and
Cheeto.
they say, oh, we want to sell you more stuff from our country. Trump doesn't sell anything. He doesn't manufacture anything. I mean, Trump's an exception. He's got some hotels, but you can't really export those. I mean, you can build them, whatever. But he's not importing metal. He's not exporting products. He's not importing rice. It's people, it's companies, it's businesses making these decisions. And when you start putting tariffs on it, basically what you're saying is you've got some farmer in China and he's producing rice. And well, let's see. I want to sell this rice wherever I can get it. I want to sell it to Africa. I want to sell it to the United States. United States says, oh, we're going to charge a tariff. Well, he's going to send it to Africa instead because he's going to get more money for it because there's no tariff. You're going to totally just screw him over and say, hey, you know what? We're not going to buy your rice and you're affecting this person. Or you've got a manufacturer of masks, which right now during COVID, oh, we need these masks, right? And we see what's happening in China, right? All of these companies who were not mask manufacturers, there's now this huge demand for masks. We need more masks. So all of these companies that were manufacturing other things that they're not selling anymore, these companies are now manufacturing masks and they're going to export them. And America's not doing that because we don't have factories and things set up like that can just change the way that they do. So do we want to say, oh, well, if we can't buy American masks, we're not going to buy any masks. We're just going to suffer. We're going to let the virus spread and we're all going to die. Or are we going to buy from China? And if Trump says, hey, we're going to put a tariff on this, well, what does that mean? If we collectively are able to pull together $20 million to buy masks, because there are people who are raising money to bulk buy masks and import them into the U.S., if we're able to raise $20 million, if there's a tariff on those masks, that means that $20 million is going to buy fewer masks when it could buy more. So these tariffs are like between these countries who are like their kings are trying to, they're having wars with each other, trade wars with each other. And we are the ones who suffer, whether we're the producers or the consumers. We're always the ones who suffer, but they don't care because we're just pawns in their game.
Right. I mean, tariffs, and one of my favorite situations, I mentioned this a couple of times with candidates this week. Let's look at the tariffs that are affecting farmers. So we tariff their product, we make it more expensive, as a result, more difficult to sell. The farmers actually lose revenue, but we actually, I got a little bit of echo here, but we actively, this is great. We give money to the farmers as recompense that is based on money that we're borrowing from China. Well, how does that work? We've failed on every single level. We've essentially interjected ourselves into a marketplace. We've driven up the cost to American consumers, or I should say, Chinese consumers, and as well created failures that we've driven up to the cost of Americans because we're borrowing money to level the playing field. That's just nuts. It makes tariffs are a tax on Americans. They will ultimately bear the price at some level, whether it be through taxation or direct, increases in the prices from farmers. They're going to pay they're paying the tariff.
Yeah,
Holy
I mean,
cow.
it's whichever way you look at it, and like as you're talking about this, I'm just thinking of like other complete disasters that are going on. So, during the World Wars, the government needed a lot more milk, I guess, to send to the troops so they could it's small, it has high calorie content, you can ship it. Okay, great. So they get all these farmers to start producing milk, and then the war's over, and they're like, all these farms are now set up with like millions of cows, and they're like, well, what do? We got all these milk cows. Well, let's figure out how we can sell all this milk. So they started like the whole like Got Milk campaign. Well, that was years later, but they started like selling milk to Americans, which is, as one guy referred to it as baby cow formula. This is the juice that you're supposed to give to a baby cow to turn it into a giant bull. It's high in calories, and we're telling people to drink it like it's going out of style just because we have these farms, and we don't want those farms to go out of business. So now we have an obesity epidemic. And that's not the only cause, but all of these things combined are just like, stop trying to control everything. Stop trying to manipulate people into consuming certain things because you don't want the producer to go out of business. Stop getting us into these circumstances in the first place, of course, but stop trying to prolong those things when everything that the government does has absolute unintended consequences. And here's another mind-blowing one, right? So during this corona shutdown, non-essential businesses have to be shut down. Well, they decided, a lot of these states that that actually enforce this said that, well, vape shops and smoke shops and cigar shops are non-essential, so they can't stay open. Well, what's interesting is I've talked to a couple doctors who basically say that this coronavirus dies at 140 degrees. So if you use like a humidifier or dehumidifier, and you inhale the vapor, it can actually kill some of the virus that's in your throat, which just makes it a little bit easier for your immune system to get the rest. Well, then I was like, well, what about smoking cigarettes? Because that's hot air that's going down your lungs, right? More than just air. But so we started talking about this, and the next thing you know, I see an article coming out that says smoking cigarettes or smoking vaporizers might actually help kill the coronavirus. So the government, trying to save us from ourselves, actually probably made more people die because we didn't have access to things that we were already doing. And because it tried to eliminate that from the entire structure of our society and say everybody's going to be a non-smoker for this whole period because we know what's best for you, the law of unintended consequences comes in and says, well, nobody's smoking. We don't have any actual statistics to know whether or not this is a good thing, whether or not it's really helping, because everybody's not smoking. And we don't know if you would have just left things alone, if it would have been better for a lot of people. So they just need to stop screwing around with it, let people make their own decisions. And we're not going to have all the information right when the pandemic hits. It's going to take a while, but once we have that information, once you allow people to make their own choices, we're going to be able to make much smarter decisions. But if you make everything operate and fit into the cookie cutter, then we've never tried anything else, so we don't know the best way to handle anything.
Yeah, the notion that anything is too big to fail has been thoroughly disproven. The notion that we can somehow eliminate market disruptions has been thoroughly disproven. The notion that somehow we can inoculate people from market disruptions has been thoroughly disproven. Yet, we constantly engage in market disruption. We just constantly try to sugarcoat life for folks, turn it into an adult version of Candyland, and we're shocked when, as you pointed out, the unanticipated or should have been anticipated consequences take place. We all know how the movie ends when we interfere with markets. We right now, just to point out to folks, before COVID, one of the hot issues was drug price controls. Now, for the love of God, anyone who wasn't too drunk for the economics class, right, should understand the impact of price controls. I mean, we're talking simplistic, fundamental economics here. And yet both the Republican Party and the Democratic Party were promoting price controls for medicine. I mean, what happened, Dan? I mean, what happens when there's price controls? Yeah, is that good for anybody?
No. It's and what's really interesting is people always want price controls for a good reason, right? So like a lot of people are calling for price controls on rent, right? The rent is too damn high. And it is. But trying to put a price control on that is like, that's trying to treat the symptom and not cure the disease. Why is the rent so high in the first place? It's because of all these programs that are making the cost to purchase a home so high. They're putting everybody in debt, so we don't have any money to put down on a house. They're taking all of our money away, so we can't save up and buy things. They're kicking people out of their homes because they can't pay the property tax, or they're stealing generational wealth with inheritance taxes. And like, it's fascinating because there's so many people in this world, in this country today, that they'll complain about the wealthy and how they have all these big homes, and we need inheritance taxes because none of them they don't deserve that. They don't have to work hard like I do. But here's the thing: most of those people, I don't want to say most, but a lot of those people would actually have homes to live in rent free if the government hadn't stolen from their parents through property tax and everything else.
Let me point out a real specific program to folks. I love your reaction to this. So, because here's the idea. So, the federal government decided to create something called opportunity zones. And the opportunity zones are, you're carving out areas which are allegedly marginalized economically. It's you have to qualify the area as distressed, and of course, there's all sorts of ups and downs on this. This was ultimately, my understanding, created originally. The concept was by the Obaministas. Now, the Republican free market Trump administration has grabbed this. So, what happens is when these opportunity zones, there's tax opportunities, there's financing opportunities, and of course, they're maintained, if you will, by something called TIF, which is tax incentive financing. The zones typically direct all sales tax revenue, if you will, by the alleged new businesses that are going to be created in these zones, and that goes to pay typically the debt on these, the debt servicing. And so here you have both members of the duopoly equally complicit in taking property in distressed areas, artificially driving up the price because of the government lending that's available, steering away whatever tax revenue was going to be created towards supporting that area. Instead, that goes to debt service to create buildings and developments, ironically, most of which have been geared towards the middle and upper class. And the net result is you've taken an area where the poor can no longer afford to be. You've incentivized the manufacture of high-income housing. You've incentivized retail that there's no real market demand for, particularly in an age of Amazon and online shopping. And you've driven typically the people who were in that community, who were supposed to be the beneficiaries of this, by the way, out somewhere else because it's become gentrified. And as a result, there's actually less affordable housing, which has driven up the price. We subsidize the creation of expensive retail and expensive housing, and we're shocked when affordable housing goes away. So then what do we turn around and do? We actually build it for people who have no stake in ownership. And you've just, is there any possibility, Dan, that any of that works at any level?
No, this is the biggest flaw with it. Like you said, you've got these billionaire developers who are going into neighborhoods who, and I hate calling them poor neighborhoods. I like to say these people aren't poor. These are victims of robbery. They have little because it's all been taken away from them. They're not poor. They work just as hard as everybody else. They've been robbed. They're victims of robbery. And then you have these billionaires who, they're great at being robbers, right? They're great at making a lot of money and selling useless things to people who don't want them, finding companies that are going out of business and finding some special government deal to make sure that the government stays in business and gets subsidies and everything else. And they're going to try to central plan an entire neighborhood for people who don't think like them and don't act like them and just want to be left alone. And they don't know what they want. Oh, we're going to build a mall for you. It's going to have all this crap in it. We don't want that. Why don't you let us build our own malls with our own stores with the things that we want to buy? Why don't you let the builders of those companies come here if it's worth it to them because we're going to buy their products? Instead, you're going to try to centrally plan everything. Oh, you think we need new houses? Build houses in the neighborhood you live in. Let us build our own houses the way we want to build them. Just stop stealing from us. Let us keep our homes. Stop charging us property tax just to live here. Stop stealing out of our paycheck. Allow us to grow our own food. This is a huge one. In California, there's this thing that's been going on where, and it hurts, especially right now, when everything's shut down and we're worried about food supply chains. Over the past year, Riverside County, California, has been waging a full-on war on homegrown poultry, chickens, turkeys, just birds. They've killed 1.2 million birds. This kid had a pet turkey and they shot it right in front of him with an AR-15. This is how insane this is. And then Corona comes in, and it's like, oh well, it would have been nice, 1.2 million birds. It would have been nice if all those hundreds or thousands of families had birds in their backyard, so that they'd have eggs, and they'd have some chicken that they could eat. When we're sitting here wondering if the entire economy is going to collapse and we're not going to have a food chain. Well, they had their own food chain until the government came in and stole that from them. So
Right.
it's like they're trying to centrally plan all this crap, and all they end up doing is taking more and more away from people. It's freedom, it's right, it's property, and people don't understand property is freedom. If you own your home, if you're able to produce just a little bit of food, you really don't have to work that hard. You don't have to spend 40 hours working to pay your rent and your property tax and your electric bill if you're able to produce that on your own with a house that you already paid for with a couple solar panels on top of it.
They don't want independence. They need you connected to
No.
the matrix. And I'm not a conspiracy theorist. I'm a conspiracy realist. And as a result, when I see, as you pointed out so adroitly, when you see planned, centralized planning in communities, you understand that it has nothing to do with for the benefit of the people who live there. Everything from the minimum wage to these type of real estate investments, which are geared towards gentrification, and the profit of those for the cronies who are connected to a variety of the governments in the nation. The duopoly is equal opportunity. It doesn't matter whether you're red or blue or anything in between. If in fact you're connected to it, then you get the benefit. You are the chosen one who manages to somehow skate all the controls that are, if you will, perpetrated and perpetuated onto an unwilling population. And we get to live with the results, and the results have been failure. If you're just joining us, by the way, Dan Taxationist Theft Berman is joining us live via the miracle of the internet, via the miracle of IP addressing. He is actually having a conversation with us here at the Coalition for the second time. He is, as we pointed out, a repeat offender. If you're just joining us, we are the Coalition, and we are loud and proud, and we are outrage porn free. You can follow us on the Facebook at facebook.com/the Coalition Radio, on the Mighty Mighty Twitter at Coalition_radio, and of course our homepage currently at coalitionradio.us, effectively moving soon to the Coalition Radio Network, coalitionradionetwork.com. So Dan, again, thanks for joining us tonight. The ripple effect of all of this is profound, and no more so than education. I personally am blessed, thanks to my talented and wonderful bride who works in the dreaded private sector of education. My children never spent a day in what we call here theft education. What are your thoughts on education moving forward? What has to happen to essentially rescue a failed, centrally planned, federally driven educational system who seems, the primary benefit, I should say, seems to be directed at people who are members of the educational industrial economy and who look at students really as sort of an afterthought, a necessary evil to kind of have around so you can justify this bureaucracy. What does Dan Berman suggest?
That's a funny way to look at it. Yeah, I mean, it's not something we should try to rescue. It's like the typewriter company. It's an old, outdated system. And actually, the reason it was created was to create factory workers. I mean, look at the way it works, right? You like in a factory, they blow the whistle, you get to work. They blow the whistle, you get to lunch. They blow the whistle, back to work. It's the exact same thing in the schools, except instead of a whistle, they have a bell. They're training you, and like it's so like they want to get you so stuck on that assembly line and that you leave for nothing, that you got to go to the bathroom. No, you better learn to go to the bathroom during these specific times where we allow it. You better learn. You're hungry, you better learn to wait until it's lunchtime. This is the system that they have. Why can't you chew gum in class? They say it's because it's going to be a distraction or something like that. No, because they don't want you chewing gum on the assembly line and being, just having a good time. They want you focusing and working and working and working. That's what this system is designed for. And so aside from the fact that like that's total crap, and they should never have created that to force us into it in the first place. Maybe that was a necessary evil to get through the Industrial Revolution. We should realize that this is a sinking ship, and we should start looking at abandoning it. I'm extremely lucky that I like to say I'm a high school dropout because I just stopped paying attention, but somehow I still got a graduation certificate. And I went to college. I actually started going to college when I was a senior in high school, as part of a program that they had, because I was really into computers. I learned computers on my own time by reading books, and just because I was absolutely fascinated with it. And by the time I started taking these college courses, like I was like I did so many things that were like, oh, you can do that. Like I was fixing their computers and doing all kinds of crap. And I was like, I'm not learning anything here. What am I doing? So I got out of that and just got into the real world and started, getting like actual jobs. And I learned and I learned and I grew, and I always kept learning and growing. And this is the same thing as going to a trade school, except this is information that's available everywhere. Now, granted, and I know a lot of people who are welders and they make a lot of money. We're talking like 80 to 100 grand a year welding. That's not something I would probably want to learn from a book or even from YouTube. But hey, I don't know. Maybe that's worked for some people where they see enough videos. I know people who have learned to sew, to cook, and like they've become, master creators of different trades, 3D printing. People can learn a lot of information in different ways. And what's stupid is that we're still stuck on this system where the government buys books from an approved publisher and they'll spend like $300 a book, or if you're going to college, they'll make you spend that money. Of course, we're all spending the money anyway through taxes. But you're buying these $300 books, and it's like, that information is all available on the internet for free. A lot of the information you can actually buy. I was always studying marketing and psychology and all these other things when I was going to community college. And that was just something that interested me, in philosophy and all these other things. And I spent, I don't know how many hundred, like I bought the used books and I spent over $100 for some of these advertising books. And yeah, okay, they were great what they were, but years down the line, when I really got into like marketing online and marketing businesses and marketing psychology and everything else, I bought so many books for like $5 or $10 who were written by people who were actually in the industry, that had been published within the last couple of years. And I learned so much more from, $50 worth of books on Amazon, brand new, than I did from these $100, $200, $300 books at college. So it's information, and information is like so plentiful right now. It's not expensive at all. And we need to start looking at school as that type of education. Information is there. If school should teach us anything, it should teach us how to learn, how to research, how to study, and how to grow and how to improve ourselves and our knowledge. And that's not something that we're going to learn at school.
No, it's certainly not, particularly in the mechanism that is obsessive over what they call STEM. And if the educational system was actually intent on creating engineers and research fellows and scientists and folks with an analytical background, that would be one thing. But the current obsession with the government seems to be that coding is the future and the salvation for others. But it's not the type of coding where it's free form. Essentially, what government seems to be, and I'd love your reaction to this, is trying to create people in a system that is going. There are folks who are going to be capable of working in an industrial IT economy, not with creativity or engineering or innovation in mind, but literally to be plugged into, if you will, a 21st century matrix, so that the critical thinking that was the hallmark of a classical liberal arts education has, if not been diminished, has been completely eradicated. We're not creating people who are independent thinkers with analytical skills anymore. What are your thoughts on that as someone who's been involved in the IT economy?
Yeah, I mean, it's really difficult to say. I mean, we have to learn how to learn first. That's first and foremost. You could learn the tools that people are using now, and just from what I've seen in the past few years, the tools we were using a few years ago are just not in use anymore. They've all been replaced by newer things. So, if you a lot of the jobs are actually becoming, you learn how to code, you learn how to use computers in general, you learn how networks work. But once you get on the job, you're going to have to relearn everything anyway, which, that doesn't make the learning in the first place. It doesn't make it irrelevant, because if you don't know any of that, then you're just not going to be able to get in and learn. Right. So you do need some of that, but you're absolutely right. The critical thinking stuff is That's a huge part of it. That's, if anything, that's the stuff we should be going to school for, is learning and experimenting and exploring. But this is the idea of, are we creators? Are we innovators? Are we going to discover new things? And whatever we're studying, are we going to be the people who create and push that industry forward? Or are we going to be the people who just administer that industry? And you look at a lot of doctors, and especially right now, all these doctors are coming out and they're giving us everything they know about corona this, corona that. How many of these doctors have actually been in a lab and done the research? How many of these doctors have actually had their hands on a sample of COVID-19 and get to look at it under a microscope and perform tests on it? None of them. Most of them haven't even done this. I mean, we've got a million experts who are doctors who are telling us this, arguing both sides of vaccines, and a lot of them, they've never done the research. They're reading what they've read in books, and we don't have. I mean, this is how the entire medical industry started. There were different people who were like, hey, you know what? I think the human body is something that we can actually fix. And we should get some cadavers and we should cut them up and see what's inside and see how these things work. And maybe when people get sick, we can treat them better. And that was looked at as absolute lunacy. And these people were put down by society. They were called crazy, and they were called like sick criminals, like with mental, this is how we treated them. But really, these people were doing research. They were trying to learn new things. They weren't just settling on whatever the previous generations had known, because what did the previous generations know? Not a whole lot. Snake oil and like whatever, eat this, eat that. And some of that worked, some of it didn't. Some of it was old wives' tales. But until we have people who are willing to push the envelope and try new things and go against the status quo and make discoveries and do experiments, we're not going to move forward as society. We're not going to evolve. And when those things have become illegal because, you don't have FDA approval for that, we don't even know the true benefits of cannabis yet because it's illegal to do any kind of real testing on it.
Mm-hmm.
It's absolutely insane. The government's holding us back, and we should be learning to go forth and discover, and not to just say like, I'm in this just for the money. I'm going to do whatever the book says so that I can go be a doctor and make some money from it, because those are the crappiest doctors who are just like, well, it fits this description. Here, try some of these pills, go home. If it doesn't work, come back. I'll give you something else. That's what you get.
So what do we do with our educational system? One of my favorite hashtags, and I guess it raised some hackles last night at a debate, is to end public education. I simply see no use for it going forward. It's been an abject failure. We've got a new generation of folks who are in many of the troubled cities across America functionally illiterate. That's again, that's not their fault per se. They've been raised by, well, literally my generation, who, probably should spend less time criticizing millennials and spend more time looking in the mirror and how we raise our children. I'm a big believer incrementalism to me is the devil. If I could somehow find a way to close every public school in America and had a place for them in September, whether it be at home or elsewhere, I would do it. What is the prescription then? What do we do in your mind?
Yeah, I mean, we need to head in that direction. And, this is kind of the silver lining in the corona epidemic is that a lot of people are homeschooling essentially right now. And of course, they're not really homeschooling. They're still using public education. They're just doing it from home. But it does show that, hey, we actually can educate our own kids. They should be bonding at home with their parents, not with some random strangers who work for government schools. In a class full of 30 where they don't even have a responsible adult who's able to supervise that many kids, where they're getting bullied in the schoolyards, and and they're not being taught how to deal with certain situations. When a kid gets beat up in the schoolyard, what did they tell them? Oh, well, just go tell the authorities, right? It's the equivalent of calling the cops. If that was your kid and this happened right in front of you, you would tell them, no, go stand up for yourself. That was wrong what he did. You can teach them morality because you're in that situation with them, and you teach them right from wrong and what they're supposed to do in those types of situations. But on the schoolyard where there's five supervisors looking after 500 kids, you're not going to get that. That's what happens at home. So, and this goes back to the idea of my new American dream where, we have people working less, because think about it. 50, 70 years ago, we didn't have, every family that had two adults didn't have both adults out working. You had one staying home that would take care of the kids and raise them. And we had that flexibility. Why is it now that if we don't have every set of parents both in the workforce across the entire country, we have an unemployment problem? That doesn't make any sense at all. Why is it so expensive just to keep a roof over the head of a family? And it all comes back down to these taxes. You get rid of these taxes, people are able to work less hours, someone's able to stay home and teach the kids. There's so much free information on the internet. We just need to start getting there. We need to start taking those steps. We need to start getting rid of the taxes so people can afford to do this. Because when you hear about people complain, well, why don't you homeschool? Even people who think homeschooling is better already, they don't have the time, they don't have the money. Those two things. How could you not have money for a less expensive education system when they're paying, 30, 60, 90 grand a year per kid in a public school, and homeschooling only costs a couple $100s a year? How do you not have money for that? Because the government stole your money and they're forcing you to pay for the public schools even if you don't use them. Why don't you have a parent at home who's able to teach your kids? Because the government keeps stealing from you, which means you all have to go to work twice as hard, twice as many people just to keep that roof over the head of that family. It's absolutely insane. We got to start cutting the taxes and we got to start phasing that system out.
Ultimately, what we've also done is we've really leveled voluntarism. Right now, we've created a culture, and it's getting worse. And this crisis is making it even worse, where folks are so crippled by taxes, so crippled by the type of market intervention that drives everything, makes everything more expensive, college educations, fuel, food, that as a result, they've literally, to your point, got no time to breathe, never mind volunteer in a community. And so when both husband and wife or partners or same-sex couples both have to literally stretch themselves out merely to maintain some basic level of living, they've got nothing left to give to the community. And as a result, because they're spending so much money on this, the thought begins to grow to give host to the notion that, well, I pay for that. Why shouldn't the government do that for me? And as a result, government gets in a little bit deeper into our society. And we take more services and take them away from the individual, and we place them in the hands of government. And government then raises the price because it's expensive to do this, for government to do this. Charity now for many people is the government taking $10,000 so that they can give maybe 4, maybe 5 to the intended guest, as opposed to Americans being self-supporting, free of all these government strictures, free of these controls, free of the yoke that's placed upon them by government, and simply be in a position to donate or volunteer themselves. How many parents can be the CYO basketball coach, or how many parents have the time or the bandwidth to be the Little League baseball coach or the softball coach, whatever, fill in the blanks. And how many folks now say, well, you know what, I pay so much in taxes, why isn't that being done for me? We've reached that tipping point. I'm just not sure how we get back. That's the problem. How do we literally reverse this terrible, terrible trend?
Right. And I mean, it all starts with cutting the taxes, because if you don't start there, people aren't going to have the money to provide these services for themselves. And I think you're really being way too generous when you say, you're going to take 10,000 from people in taxes and give them back 5, because remember, we've got all these wars that we're paying for. We've got, all the waste that this goes to, the corporate contracts and everything, the $500 toilet seats and everything else, like all this money is being laundered away from us. And, look at this, how much property in this country do banks own? And how did a bank get that money to own all this property? It's been swindled away from us. And so we need to look at, hey, these banks are insolvent. It wouldn't be too far-fetched to figure out a way to get that property out of the bank's hands and back into the hands of the people. Start forgiving some of those debts. And I know a lot of people are going to say, oh, well, if somebody's entered into a contract to borrow money and pay interest, they should fulfill their obligation. Yeah, except the fact that those entire contracts are based on fraud. And when you look at it that way, if a contract is fraudulent, it's not enforceable. So there is a way, I think, to get everybody back into their property and get them to stop paying rent. But I mean, look, if you get rid of property tax, if you just start with just property tax, everybody's rent is going to go down. That means the cost of living is going to go down. And even if you don't own your home, if you're just renting, you're paying property tax. And I hear this argument all the time. Oh, so you think that if you get rid of the property tax, a landlord's just going to lower his rent for everybody? Yes, he might not do it immediately if you've got a contract, but yes, he's going to, because no matter where you live, there's one guy who's got an apartment who he just can't rent, and he can't lower the price anymore because he's got to pay the property tax. But if you get that property tax away, he's going to lower his price. What's going to happen? Someone's going to move into his from someone else's. That person's going to be the odd man out with, oh man, I can't get anybody in here. I'm going to have to lower my prices. That's how it works. It's not going to be overnight, but it works. It's going to happen. If you think it doesn't work, then you would have to believe if you made everybody's property tax go up by $5,000, that your rent would still stay the same at $1,000, and your landlord's going to pay. He's going to be losing money every month just to keep a roof over your head. That's insane. If the tax goes up, so will the rent, and if the tax goes down, so will the rent.
You know, it's as simple as this scenario. You've got 4 gas stations within a mile. Everybody's got the same price. One guy says, "You know what? I'm gonna cut 3 or 4 cents off," and all of a sudden, like clockwork, people who are price driven, a product like gasoline is very fungible. They alter their price because people will save money on gas, and then all of a sudden, the other guys in the area what happened? They're looking at empty pumps, and they realize, ruh-roh, we got a case of the free market here. What will we do? Well, if they sit there and do nothing, they will go out of business. They will cease to exist because, again, the mantra throughout the entire evening tonight, throughout every show we do here, and through just about every libertarian I know, is that the low-cost producer of a quality product can achieve a steady state where they are represented as a better value to anyone in the marketplace for that product. They will win. And that's irrelevant of borders. It's irrelevant of constituency. It's a simple fact of life. And it's on that basis that whether it be gasoline, housing, any one of the creature comforts that we need, flat screen TVs, that drives the marketplace. And the burdens put on individual companies within individual entrepreneurs or innovators within certain sections of the market, perhaps geographically, serve to disincentivize the market from buying their product and puts them at a competitive disadvantage. And that market ignores largely artificial borders placed by individuals looking to control their own fiefdom. Which brings us to the next point, immigration. Where does Dan Berman stand on the vast dumpster fire that is our immigration system here in these United States of America?
I stand here on the other side of the border in Mexico, actually.
Irony, isn't it? Hey, I knew that.
Yeah. I mean, it's like you said, it is really about control. There was Bill Gates talking the other day about, well, we should get some sort of digital certificate, which, that needs a microchip or something, or a passport to go into, to basically declare whether or not somebody's been immunized to COVID-19 before they're able to travel in and out of a country. We've been hearing things like this for a very long time, but this is all about control. I mean, think about it. What do they do at airports? They check for drugs. They check for products. Are you bringing any cigars or alcohol, fruits or vegetables? Like, this is all about control. And yeah, I get it. There's some legitimate concern about, people bringing certain things from one place to another. I think I want to say the snails in California came from some guy brought them from France to start a restaurant, and then his restaurant went out of business, so he set them loose, and now there's snails all over California. I don't know if that's a true story or not. There's another thing out there called ice plants, which they brought in from some other part of the country or some other part of the world, which was supposed to, they were going to plant it on the side of the highways, and the roots were going to go in and keep the dirt from, from sliding out under the roads. And now this plant is just everywhere. It's taken over like a virus, and it's all over the place. It's on the beaches everywhere in Los Angeles. And that was a government program that decided to move that stuff around.
Right.
I know people who smuggle seeds in and out of Mexico and the United States just because they make nice flowers and they plant them. But it's like, okay, yeah, well, so I guess you're moving wildlife, you're moving animals. That's really dangerous. Yeah, maybe we should put up borders to stop that. But think about this. There are birds that migrate all over the world, and they don't stop for borders. There are animals that go all across borders. You've got deer, you've got mountain lions, and everything else that cross the borders of Mexico and the United States. Are you going to stop that? Is that what the wall is really for? You've got wildlife, and sometimes that wildlife carries other wildlife. It carries ticks. It carries diseases. There's so many different ways that this can happen, and so now you're just asking, okay, let's make sure that people aren't able to do that. And but then government does it every once in a while, and that really wrecks things. This is something you're not going to stop, and it's not necessarily a bad thing. The world is always going to evolve, and it's, a lot of people get stuck in this mindset of of the world is almost perfect today, if only it could stay this way forever. But that's an unrealistic dream, and especially when you want to control other people to make sure that the world stays the same for you. I mean, think about it. If you were living in a perfect world today, and I know nobody's going to say yes to that because of Corona, but let's just go back a couple months. If that was a perfect world for you, and you wanted to stay in that world forever, I mean, if I gave you a box with a button that said, if you press that button, you're going to wipe off 99.999% of the population, but the world as you see it is going to stay exactly the way it is, just for you, would you press that button? I mean, that's kind of what we're threatening to do. And I get it. It's, it's different saying you can't cross this line from, hey, we're going to kill you. I see that that's different, but it's attempting to control other people and their free will and their rights of movement. And, why are these borders where they are in the first place? Why aren't they 10 miles south or 10 miles north? What's so magical about these borders? And what about the borders between states? I mean, we have agreements between states. So isn't there an issue taking wildlife or fruits or vegetables from California to New York or Florida? We don't have checkpoints in between those, right? Every immigration problem that we hear about from Mexico, well, they're stealing children and they're smuggling them across the border to put in the sex trade. How do you know they're not stealing children from California and smuggling them into New Mexico or Nevada or any other state? They don't have checkpoints. They're not checking passports. Should we impose that? Maybe. I mean, well, hey, what if they're stealing children from Los Angeles and putting them up to San Francisco and never leaving the state? Should we put borders around every single city? I mean, if you really want absolute control, we can go in that direction. But when you start to point that out, it starts sounding really pretty ridiculous.
And ultimately, people will innovate and subvert them. That's the common denominator.
Yeah.
That will always
exactly.
always happen. But it's astonishing because the energy that's put into avoiding them is so counterproductive. I'll give you an example because you're a traveling guy. If you go to Bermuda, there is no income tax. They fund things with a value-added tax. As a result, this entire industry that exists that costs companies and entrepreneurs countless bazillions, if that's a number, to subvert, pervert, revert, convert their business in order to conform with techniques to avoid income tax, as opposed to solely focusing on being productive and making the best widget, the best flux capacitor, the best DeLorean ever. It's all that energy, all that intellectual capital, all that emotion is put into running businesses, not to be that, as the Army would say, all that you can be, but instead to find ways to avoid taxes. That to me is the final coup de grace. I mean, it's madness. Some of the brightest people we have in our nation are there to subvert and, again, avoid taxes in our overly harsh criminal justice system. Why? It's simply,
somebody got greedy.
Simply, if there was a break glass, add water, in case of fire, simply ending the war on drugs and allowing for the free exchange of people and idea of commerce over pseudo borders would instantly raise the standard of living within minutes of virtually everyone in this planet. It's so simple. Yeah. None of this has been productive.
I mean, I think, the way I look at, especially the war on drugs, a lot of people say the war on drugs has failed. I've even said that a million times. It really hasn't. The war on drugs is an absolute success. It just really depends on who's successful, right? Yeah, because I work in law enforcement. We need more jobs. We need higher paying jobs. We need more equipment. Oh, well, let's fund this program through taxes and let's go after something, job security. We'll go after something that can never be eliminated. It's perfect. We've got more police hired than ever fighting this drug war. We've got so many jobs. Unemployment is at like an unbelievable low in that sector. When you look at it like that, it's an amazing success. But how do you sell that? You tell people, we're going to make you safe. We're going to get rid of the drugs. We're going to, they create all these, they create the need for it. They create the propaganda to make you afraid of it so that you buy a product or an idea. That's exactly what's happened.
Right. There's always got to be a bogeyman. There's always got to be the evildoers. There's always got to be, in the Bush administration, or as they call them, the shrub, there was it was the evildoers. You're either with us or against us. And in doing so, took countries, some of which had some level of quote unquote democracy or Republican government, some level, blew them up in exchange really for market controls and market intrusions. In every successive generation of political, if you will, generations, there has been some effort to demonize society. In the case of the Cheeto, it is clearly Central and Latin America, who have become the evildoers, the bad hombres, coming in with their gangs and everything else. Yet, one of the challenges that we're going to be facing in the next set of unexpected set of consequences, which should be completely predictable, by the way, is that by closing our border, the folks who are going to be available to harvest our next crop are where? Bueller? Anyone? But we sure showed them, damn it. We closed those borders. They won't. Americans are going to be saved. Yeah, okay. Let's see how that works out. We've already got the prospect because of a supply chain that functions too much on just in time, and because of the way the economy has been structured in this nation that can't deliver products from A to C. Yeah, we've got the spectacle, if you will, in a country where we've got lines for food and food pantries facing record drama, record customers, unable to get products that are being thrown away in other parts of the country. That is an abomination. So simply because of the way that we create barriers to entry, whether it be in food distribution, food production, again, a free market is the answer to that. And yet, again, I will go wait online at the BJ's here in New England tomorrow at some point, because Friday morning is a good time to get the truckloads that come in. And I'm not an apparatchik. I don't work for the true 1% of this nation are federal and state and local governmental employees and now we work in an environment where they are guaranteed everything. They are the true 1% of this country, by the way, outside of a handful of billionaires, because we now worship at the altar of federal and state and local government. Again, our federal family. But again, the war on drugs, it's affected our immigration policy. It's affected our foreign policy. It's created health crises even before today. And again, we prevent the low-cost producer finds the highest level of balance between price and quality, so that the market can operate more efficiently and people can get greater value for the dollar. We've screwed with that as well. And the central demon is government, isn't it? I mean, isn't that the common denominator, Dan? Government?
Yeah, I mean, it's ultimately it's control, and in every aspect of it, there's money or power to gain. I mean, you look at border controls, you look at market controls. I mean, think about it. A lot of people hate the free market because they think that's when the big greedy corporations come in and create monopolies. But no, monopolies are created by government. Monopolies are created by organizations that say, "Oh, I'm making one product and I want to make sure nobody else can make that product. So we're going to hire men with guns to make sure that if anybody does, that they go to them and they shut them down, or they demand that we make it look like we're the nice guy, right? We tell them like, oh yeah, no, well, he just didn't have a license. Yeah, we didn't shut him down. We didn't threaten him. We didn't point guns at him. We just told him he needed to have the proper license for it, which costs $100 million in some special favors to get that license. This is what they do, and it's literally to the government. The government is the force arm of the corporations to protect their monopolies at this point. That's really what it is. And when you have, why would they want to shut down borders? Because they want to control trade. I mean, think about it. In the United States, this is a big one with, I use insulin with the healthcare example all the time. Insulin is manufactured in the United States. It's sold in the United States for $100. There's only 3 companies allowed to sell insulin in the United States. $100 for the equivalent of what you buy in Mexico for about $10. Why is that? Mexico must have a different supplier, a lower quality, something else. No, actually, the same manufacturer that sells it in the U.S. for $100 sells it in Mexico for $10. Why? Because Mexico allows 47 other companies. Well, not 47. They allow several of the 47 global manufacturers of insulin to sell in Mexico. They compete. They make lower prices. The same ones that manufacture in the United States for $100 are selling it for $10 in Mexico. And guess what? How do they protect and make sure that every American pays $100 instead of calling up some online pharmacy in Mexico and saying, hey, send me the same stuff for a tenth of the price? How do they do that? They make a law that says you can't import drugs across the border. And how do they enforce that? They need border controls. They need immigration. When you come through with a truck, what's in the truck? Do you have a license for that? Is it something that you're allowed to import? Or are you importing something that's going to compete with one of our markets of something that we already produce? That's what they're looking for. Florida was having a hard time selling their tomatoes because I guess tomatoes grow in naturally in tropical areas, and Florida's not, it's close to tropical, but not like Mexico. Mexico's got better tomatoes. And Florida, the tomato industry in Florida actually started a propaganda campaign against Mexican tomatoes, saying they're all disgusting and rotten and everything else, and buy Florida tomatoes, because they couldn't sell theirs because theirs were the inferior product. So instead they threatened, I think they said that the tomatoes were infected with some sort of like disease and you shouldn't eat those. This is what they do. It's all about control and profit.
It's interesting. We have on a monthly basis Professor Andy Hernandez, who is from the Western New Mexico University, based down in Deming, New Mexico area, about 30 miles north of the border. And he points out, to your point about borders, there is, in an area like that, there has been a normalized passage between Mexico and the United States on a daily basis of trade. But it is, if you will, and I'm going to date myself with the IT folks in the audience, it is not an asynchronous communication, it is a bisynchronous communication. So Americans are going to Mexico to take advantage of lower medical costs for elective surgery, particularly cosmetic surgeries. Americans are going to get, like you mentioned, over the United States, as people leave the United States to go to Mexico to purchase pharmaceuticals. American business is going over to Mexico to have contract manufacturing done for them in protected trade zones. That's the normal course of business and has been for generations of New Mexicans. They're just used to it. That's how it works until, of course, and it works that way because the medical care is good enough. So quite frankly, folks are comfortable. Doctors have earned in the free market reputations over there. based on referrals as opposed to government sanctions and government licensing, which do simply nothing but drive up the money and create an infrastructure for an artificial bureaucracy. If on any of the three levels they couldn't get the quality right of the contract manufacturing that was done, they couldn't get the level of medical care that they get. If that couldn't happen, it wouldn't happen. Any market force in the world, artificial one, implanted by government, could not get people to go across that border to do that. They do it because it represents value and it represents competition and it represents disruption. That's why. It could be cheaper, and if there were reports of people dying left and right on the operating tables over there, guess what? People wouldn't go.
They wouldn't do it.
Nope. Wouldn't be prudent. So it's the whole notion of licensing, border controls, price controls, all of that, where we're trying desperately to save ourselves from ourselves. And, as I say so often, I have seen the enemy and he is us. And we represent our own worst enemy with regard to our economy. It's become horribly stilted, horribly controlled, and the people that we most affect are ourselves. It's breathtaking to watch. Foreign policy. Talk to me about the increased militarization of America, the foreign adventures, the War Powers Act. What are your thoughts lead to you there?
When you say increased militarization of America, I don't know if you're talking about foreign policy.
Right.
Yeah.
Two words. Posse comitatus.
Yeah. We're engaged in all kinds of illegal wars. We need to stop that. I'm tired of saying it. Even I've been saying it for so many years. I know so many other people have been saying it. A lot of people have been saying it since the 1970s. And it's so tiring. We need to end these stupid wars. And they find a way every once in a while to reinvigorate us and say, oh, we got to go to war with Afghanistan or Iraq or Iran or Libya or Syria. Like and every time some group of people falls for it, or at least they fall for it enough to allow it to happen. It's absolutely insane. And they always use fear to control us. Oh, they're using gas weapons, and if we don't take care of it now, they could end up over here. No, that's not the reality of how it works. Every time we go to war, we create more enemies. We create more people who hate us. It is probably going to end up back over here. Look at 9/11. Whether you believe the official story or not, it's because people hate us and they took advantage of that fear and took us to war again. It's a never-ending cycle unless we just take a stand and say, hey, let's stop it. I mean, look, if you walked into a room and you saw two people taking turns punching each other in the face, right? And you say, hey guys, why don't you just stop? And then the last guy to get punched is going to say, well, he just hit me, so I at least got to punch him back one more time. And he does. And the other guy says, well, he just hit me, so I at least got to punch him back one more time. Well, hey, who threw the first punch? And they're both going to say, well, he did. Like, that's what we're stuck in right now. So, okay, guys, just calm down, right? Break up the fight. And of course, that's when we have these little peace times that last for maybe a couple months or whatever. And then all of a sudden it's like, you know what? I think I need to go over there and get that last punch. That's what it is. And we have to stop that. We have to be the ones to say, okay, fine. You hit me last. We're not going to hit back. We're not going to continue the cycle. You got me. You win. Okay, fine. Let's go on. Let's become trade partners. Let's help each other with economies. Let's grow. Let's trade. Let's all be better people. Don't do it for me. Don't do it for you. Do it for the people of your country if you really care about them at all. And if you don't, well, then they need to get rid of you. That's the reality of the way it should be, because most people in countries don't want to go to war. Right. Most people in America, most people in Iraq, most people in Iran, most people in Mexico, most people in China, most people in Russia do not want to go to war with anybody. It's the leaders. It's always the leaders. And sometimes they trick, maybe tens of thousands or a few 100,000, or in some rare cases, a couple million people to go along with it with them. But in so many cases, most of the population does not want the war. I mean, you don't see it's not every day you see everybody saying, "Hey, I want to volunteer for, for the military and I want to go fight in Syria or China." Nobody's saying that today because nobody wants the war. They know we've had such a long history of this that I think so many people are waking up to the reality that like it's just absolute nonsense. We got to stop doing it.
The difference between a terrorist and a revolutionary is simply a matter of your perspective. The person who's fighting, if you will, the illegal war and trying to protect your community, of course, is a revolutionary, a hero. The person who is invading your country, trying to impact your life, trying to kill your family and your neighbors, they're a terrorist. Now flip it. If in fact the United States is engaged in an illegal operation without the consent of the legislative branch and is going to drone the freedom into somebody, what would we expect those folks to consider us? We are the terrorists. One of the few times I've ever agreed with Cheeto, all right, the orange one, is when early in his administration, or maybe it was even in the campaign, he was talking about the Russians, and he made a remarkable remark as an aside almost when he talked about, our record isn't so great. We don't have the cleanest hands either. And then dismissed it. But you know what? At that one moment in time, he was exactly right. If you go back to the situation, actually, when you joined us last time, it was a conversation about what happened in Iran when we took out a sitting general of a foreign military on foreign lands. And so many folks got on the air and called us and wrote editorials about this and the conventional media. And, well, the Iranians, they've been terrorizing us for years. They deserve it. Since the 70s, they've been attacking us. Well, hello. In the 1950s, we overthrew the CIA, and it's been admitted to by the CIA, documented. The CIA overthrew what constitutes a near democratically elected government in Iran so that they could install the Shah. Again, I have seen the enemy and he is us. We are single-handedly responsible for the chain of events that began. To your point, the Rock'em Sock'em robots each need to take the last turn at knocking their block off because it fits the narrative of one side and is politically expedient.
Right.
So until someone says enough, yeah, go ahead, buddy.
Well, I was going to say it's so disturbing how that's manipulated by the media. I mean, think about it. If I just showed you a picture of somebody and I said, and especially if I was sitting on CNN right now and I showed you a picture of this guy and I said, yes, this guy is an American citizen. He committed treason by helping the Iraq military. Are you going to believe it? You don't know who this person is. You don't know any information. Maybe I'm wearing a U.S. military general's outfit or something. You have no idea who I am, if I've actually been elected or appointed anywhere. You have no idea who this person is. You just trust it on face value. This is how the media controls us. This is how they destroyed Julian Assange and some other people and their reputation and called them treasonous for doing what? For doing in many cases the right thing. Julian Assange is questionable to some people. What about Edward Snowden? Same thing. Some people are going to question that. Why? Because what he did hurt the American military. It hurt what they're doing to their own citizens. But isn't that treasonous? Isn't that illegal and unconstitutional? And somehow the person who revealed that is the person who's the wrongdoer. We have in this country, we have people who have defended their own land, their own homes, and they've been called terrorists by the government for doing nothing, for harming nobody, for threatening nobody, for doing absolutely nothing but protecting their own homes. We've seen it time and time again, and they're treated like criminals. And this is exactly what happens around the world. And it's all you need is a scapegoat or an accusation in order to take control or take power or do something. I mean, think about it. If I owned a corporation and there's a competing corporation, and I had enough money, I could pay the government to say, hey, that guy, just set him up, just make him look like a terrorist. The government would come in, they'd blow up his factory, they'd blow up his home, they'd kill everybody. And for what? What would they do? Plant some guns on him, say, oh yeah, he was doing some criminal stuff. He was laundering money for the drug cartels, and they'd make up a whole story. They absolutely have the power to do this, and everybody would believe it.
Right.
That's how powerful that is. And of course, that's an exaggeration. That's not a true story or anything, but that's the power that they have. They can go that far, and sometimes they get pretty damn close to going that far. And sometimes it's not just blowing up a factory, it's blowing up an entire country. Why? Because they've got some resources, because those resources are competing, or because an American corporation wants those resources.
Right.
We hear so much about the Iraq War, about how there were all these American oil companies who were out there, and the troops were protecting those companies. They were providing security for American companies to extract oil from the Middle East. Why aren't these corporations paying for their own protection? Why do they need that kind of protection? Are there just random gangs going around stealing that much oil? Or is it the military who doesn't want them there because they're stealing the oil? What's the real story?
And despite all those interventions, even the most recent one by Trump in trying to arrange a forced marriage with Saudi Arabia and Russia, despite all of that, the market still continues to speak. In a time of declining economic output, the price of oil has collapsed, predictably, particularly when the decline is so stunning as it is internationally with COVID. But again, they need to force up this compelling need to force up the price of oil. They're using it to, quote unquote, save American jobs, eliminating the competitive advantage to other industries who would realize significant gains in the wake of declining oil prices. They simply can't they can't help themselves. Again, it's all interwoven. And that's not a conspiracy theory. It's just the continuing long arm of government as it interferes in private markets and private lives to achieve desired results. And the desired results don't very often happen to coincide with the desires of ordinary Americans. And if the libertarian movement is to succeed, they need to continue to point that out in a rational way. Simply create a value argument and point out that the unfettered failure of government, mainly because of planned and unplanned interventions into ordinary lives at virtually every level, economically, philosophically, socially, morally, and the almost inevitable failure that results, whether it be the housing market, the medical market, the education market, name any one of them. And they all suffer from not the unseen hand of the marketplace, but the very highly visible hand of government. It's the tragedy is immense. We've lost a generation because of it, intellectually, academically. We're about to lose a generation going forward because of the immense amount of debt that we're going to leave them. And who do we have to blame? Time to look in the mirror. It's the current generation of Americans who is allowing government this power, which is why I applaud the current crop of libertarian candidates, because every one of them understands the very real threat that this represents to all of us. That's why I'm so proud to be a libertarian. Well, I just hope we don't have to do one more generation of bumper stickers that says, I voted for, fill in the blank, to point out to people, once again, that this current morass that we're in is completely the result of choices made by Americans. Dan, how can folks find out about your campaign? It's one of the more memorable campaign slogans to libertarians everywhere. But give us the menu of choices as to where folks can even go into more depth.
All right.
With your philosophy.
Of course, there's Berman2020.com. That's the main campaign site. And from there, you'll find links to all the social media pages, Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, and YouTube. YouTube, there's lots of video. I've got my own podcast where I actually interview a lot of the other presidential candidates. and a lot of really interesting information that anybody who's seeking freedom can learn from, whether it's how to not pay your taxes, how to get away with driving without a license, how to just be free. There's lots of information there. I've got taxationistheft.cards, which is my merchandise store, which is kind of my business that's kind of how this whole thing got started, selling t-shirts and hats like this one. And a lot of that is how I fund this campaign. And then, of course, we've got Tit Fest coming up, Taxation is Theft Fest 2020. And this is going to be an awesome event. It's going to be May 16th and 17th, and we're going to have lots of speakers there. It's going to be really awesome. It's a virtual event, so you'll be able to watch it live online. And we've got a lot more details and some really exciting speakers coming up for that. But that's really just there to promote the idea of libertarianism. It's going to be free for everyone. And it should be pretty awesome.
Dan, thank you so much for joining us. One of the things that we're talking about doing starting next week, we've got a couple more candidates coming on the air that, again, have been doing yeoman's work for so many months out there campaigning in this kind of format. But one of the things that we're talking about doing is I'm a big fan of old school talk radio. And we've got set up within the coalition here the technology so that folks can, as opposed to an AMA, which there's been some great AMAs, Ask Me Anythings, but they're digital and you kind of type a question and it's, I don't know, for me, I'm old school, I'm a telephone guy. I use a telephone to make telephone calls. So what we're going to be setting up here is the ability to have a candidate come online, and instead of an Ask Me Anything where you're just typing in questions, to literally have a couple-minute conversation with the candidate and, well, ask them anything. Is that, via the old school telephonic device where someone dials an area code and then 7 successive numbers, and again, through the magic of telephone, someone answers and then transfers the call to the candidate directly. So you actually engage in multiple levels of verbal communication. Is that something that you'd be interested in joining?
Yeah, absolutely.
All right. So we'll keep you apprised of that. But again, thank you so much for joining us tonight. I know you've been on the line for, it looks like, almost a couple hours. It's amazing how quickly the time goes past. But when it's great conversation, to me that's timeless. So Dan Behrman, of course, Behrman 2020. That's spelled BEHRMAN. I think that's like the paint, right? Behrman2020.com. Just Google taxation is theft, and I guarantee you he will be shortly. His handsome visage will be certainly visiting your screen within microseconds. We are the Coalition, a loud and proud, outrage porn-free, civilly disobedient media broadcasting live on the worldwide Coalition Radio Network at coalitionradionetwork.com, facebook.com/the Coalition Radio, on the mighty Twitter at Coalition_radio, and of course the mothership at coalitionradio.us. Folks, if you've enjoyed this, I would invite you, if you will, to follow us on the Twitter, subscribe to our YouTube, become friends with us on the Facebook, and because again, Dan could tell you, most of our guests have one of the common denominators of so many libertarian candidates is that they've got their own social media efforts. Those follows, those likes, those subscriptions, those shares mean so much to us because it allows us the opportunity to reach beyond the great veil that covers like smog over American media, and it gives us the opportunity to broaden our reach and to reach out to folks who might not otherwise hear libertarian candidates, the quality of which I believe is unsurpassed. Folks, we're going to be on the line again in a minute or two or three sometimes with a talk radio element. We'll be on the air for about a half hour or so. We'd invite you to actually join us. 401-205-3738 if you want to stay on the line. It's open lines. We'll talk about Dan. We'll talk about any of the candidates who have been here this week. And you can ask us anything, but on a telephone. 401-205-3738. Folks, stay tuned. We'll be right back.